Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Value Analysis Expert Series. My name is Jenell Robinson, and today I am joined by Terri Nelson and Barbara Strain, my esteemed colleagues in the value analysis world. Today we thought we would talk about the enigma that is UDIs, and UDIs are Unique Device Identification Codes. How they fall into your daily practice, how they fall into an organization's daily practice, and what they are used for along the way, everything from regulatory to core business practices. So, Terri, let's start off with you. Tell us a little bit about UDIs and how they're helpful to a vendor or to a partner.
Yeah, so I think of two components, and one of them, Barbara and I worked on a project looking at recalls and the process to identify where products were in your organization. So if you have a UDI code on an item and it's within your tracking tool, whatever that would be, it's in your EMR, it's in your location for data that you keep, you can get down to right where that product is located, whether it's in a warehouse, whether it's used on a patient yet, or whether it's used in a storage room type of thing. So to help to decrease risk to a patient when there's a disruption or a recall notification, some quality issue, UDIs can be very effective for that. The other thing that they can also help you with is just if you're doing measurements on outcomes in a product. So you can identify the volume that were used. As long as you have the common language, you can identify the volume, the location. So we all worked at multiple location facilities within our organization. So if I'm wondering if Florida used a lot of a product, by having that unique identifier for an item, you can get down to that level. It only works if you can pull the data, though, Jenell.
What about just a thought that came to my mind? What about when you are potentially evaluating, and this is for both you, Barbara and Terri, when you're potentially evaluating a product, and are you able to pull it up by this particular code that's been assigned and identify competitors or what is currently used, and how do you use that in your practice?
Yeah. Barbara, you want to take that?
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, Jenell, is that it's a universal way of which we can do our work more effectively. So when one of the complaints that a group of suppliers, I was on a short panel back in 2019, before COVID, and the suppliers talked about how painstaking and how much work doing these competitive comparisons. So if we give them a list of our products and then they've got to go out and figure out, is this truly the same product that we have, or is it a premium product or whatever? So if we've got these UDIs, there's two components to this. One is the actual, what we call the front end, where it really describes it's a urinary catheter. Mm-hmm. So no matter who is making it or whatever, and then the rest of it is a PI, which is a product identifier, which is all the expiration date, when it was manufactured, all that sort of stuff. So if we just stick with the UDI front end part, it allows you then to pull up everything that would be in that category that you're looking at. So it at least helps to streamline when you're doing these comparisons to others in the market. Because right now that's very difficult to do unless we have some sort of unification. Because if you put in, and I always challenge people to do this, if you put in some sort of product code that you know of that isn't a UDI from any product, you're going to get anywhere from 5 to 10 or even 20 products that may have that same exact code across a variety of companies. So it's really helpful on the provider side and wouldn't take much effort on the supplier side to help to us and the whole industry.
I think a good point too, it's international. classification system. So if a product is made in Spain or over in Europe someplace, it's the same structure that can be used to identify that product, which helps us when we bring in products outside that are not manufactured in the United States. So
I'm more familiar with using UDIs in the coding and billing process. Everything from as it goes into the ERP or the centralized, business operations unit, data center of the organization, it can flow seamlessly. From charting to or ordering, I guess would be before charting, right? Ordering, usage, charting, billing, coding and billing, and then reimbursement. And then on the flip side, checking outcome measures. You can check particular outcome measures by pulling one singular code that pulls up all of the items that you use within that organization. And then you can start to drill down from there. But so I've used the numbers a little differently, perhaps in just, the daily practice or what I'm used to than both of you. So it's interesting. I remember when they first came out and it was this big, like, black box, almost like opening Pandora's box, trying to assign all of these numbers and everyone coming up with, their own database and all of these issues. And now, I'm going to punt it to one of you two, but I believe there is a uniform way to assign the numbers or the way the numbers are assigned. So it is uniform across globally. Am I correct?
Yeah, you're right. That's the assumption. There are still some outliers there where they'll take the standard that might be universal and make some enhancements to it. So like Barbara talked about the first part, there's a middle, right, and an end, but sometimes they'll add a couple. And those are different companies that actually do data management and coding assignment and what have you, which it always made me crazy, and it still makes me crazy. We need just to have a common source, because then, to what you were saying earlier, Jenell, and Barbara's alluded to as well, is now I can put all of my urinary catheters in one bucket, and I can make inferences when I align them up with patients, the volume that were used, the type of patients, clinical outcomes may or may not be associated with that, but you can make inferences, and now you're doing a better job of identifying product categories that you should be reviewing and what are key components of that review process. So measurement links into all of that information.
What can sometimes get confusing is if you take a box that a product comes in or their packaging and you're supposed to scan the right number. Say you're doing a case in the OR or the cath lab or someplace. And sometimes there's like 4 or 5 barcodes on that box, and you don't know which one to scan. Mm-hmm. So there's the GS1, who is an organization that provides GDNs, which are standard numbers. Then there's also HIBICS, who still exists and has their own number. So some products might put all of those designations on there. And if you're not scanning the right thing, it doesn't match what you have in your ERP, which is your enterprise resource planner. So anyway, it's just hard sometimes to really comply. But I think what we're trying to talk about is there's ways out there that we can all work together in the industry to make it better for everyone, whether you're the supplier, provider, but I'm always looking towards the patient, because then everything will be more seamless and things. Yeah. And measurements and things are so important. So I think we need to probably talk about what kind of measurements do we really use these for. Jenell mentioned a perfect one, which was when you're looking at, billing purposes and things. But getting down to the nitty gritty, what kind of measurements are important to really use in the work, either at value analysis level or in supply chain, that help to guide? Are we doing the right thing? Are things working out? And then what do we share with suppliers and vice versa about how does that all work together? So, Terri, you want to talk a little bit about some measurements that are important?
Yeah. I want to, because we've talked about this in previous podcasts that we've had, right? That we have to have a relationship with the provider and the supplier on both sides. And how do we know a product that we're reviewing? How are we going to measure its effectiveness? And all three of us had said this, right? Patients at the center of our universe, as it should be. As long as we don't lose that fact, I just feel like we'll always do the best outcomes for that patient. And it should be cost effective as well. So what Jenell had said too, the coding helps us to drive to the price and the cost and the reimbursement issue and the value that it's going to have for an organization, because you have to revenue generation. But the measurement has to be agreed upon ahead of time. And UDIs or some type of classification system, I'll even go back to that, will help to identify what is the product grouping that we're looking at. And then we can pull data on that type of patient, that products used in these types of patients. If I find out that products always used in orthopedics, that's going to be my focus. And that's going to be the focus how we set up a group to review it, right? You're going to look at orthopedics. Absolutely. I want to make sure that I've got those groups involved. But if it covers, and we've all had this, if it covers multiple clinical areas, inpatient, outpatient, acute, non-acute, we want to look at where that product lands and the volume associated. This is our homework, I feel like, in value analysis, and that we are getting the right group to review that product. That's where the supply and the provider have to come to common ground. We've all sat where they've said, when they've done a product review, right, this is always used in your acute care, and this is the group that uses it. And then we run the numbers, and it's like, that group didn't use it at all. So, we don't want to create, because that starts now to create credibility and friction.
Right.
I don't want to do that. I'm tired of doing that. I'm tired of being meanie. Somebody reminded me of that yesterday. They said to me, well, you're so tough.
And that's what things that I know I tell my clients, most of which are suppliers as well as providers, is they have to know where their product's market really lies. And really understand it. If you're going to talk to an entity, whatever that provider entity is, you have to understand, do they even play in those areas? So if they've got something very sophisticated for interventional radiology or neuroradiology or something, but those organizations really don't have an emphasis and those patients may get referred somewhere, they have to understand that. So the suppliers need to really know and hone their market to say, is it both inpatient and outpatient, or is it something that can help in a clinic level, or is it going to cause issues on a nursing unit as far as recovering when a patient gets sent there or they get readmitted or admitted later or something. So there's all this sort of nuance that right down to the product level and how it's really functioning in provider organizations, and how you need to actually understand, how do I talk about that? Who do I talk to, and how do I talk to them about all of that? So measurements are really important. But Jenell, I'm sure you've run into this as well as Terri, is that not all data is created equal within provider organizations. So why don't you start us on that terrible conversation we're now going to have for the next few minutes about how easy or difficult it is to get data within provider organization.
Have you ever looked in a silo across a 100-mile range? It's extremely challenging. And I think, hopefully it's getting better, and the systems, the ERP systems are getting a little more sophisticated. But the value analysis professional at the organization that a supplier is talking to or targeting is really the link between all of those different data silos. So you may have your purchasing data. That's a silo. Then you may have OR supply data. That's a silo. Inpatient, outpatient, whichever care area. Then you have your quality metrics data. That's a silo. And, unfortunately, there's all of these little silos that don't necessarily mesh to create that picture, but it's that value analysis team's responsibility, and they have the skills to be able to create a picture by pulling data from all of these different silos. I've used the codes, the UDI codes before to help a supplier identify a population that wasn't necessarily on their radar. Mm-hmm. So I was able to do that by pulling from different data sources. But I think the moral of my story is, it's a compass, and the value analysis professional is the linchpin in that compass. And all of the silos are around, but they typically have access to different things. And I think it just depends on what the meaningful measurement is that's trying to be conveyed, or that is proposed as the value, on where you pull that specific data from. If it's very specific, or if it's a generalized type item. If you're looking, you can get down to some quality metrics such as length of stay, ICU days. You can break it down as far as you need to demonstrate the value of a particular technology. But it all really starts with unified coding.
Yeah, it made me think about our presentation that we did in August, and we talked about the different relationships. So if I have a strategic partnership with a certain population, a provider and a supplier, then we need to make sure we understand our data sources and that we're pulling the same things. So I think you gave a great example, Jenell. So this is the value of working together on that and understanding it. And the other thing you mentioned was value analysis. We have always been the group that kind of knows, hey, before we go off, let's talk to IT. Let's talk to procurement. Let's talk to inventory, because they're in their silo. I mean, it was such a perfect example. They're in their silo and they want all these data elements. And we've all been on groups that we go in and we look at what the data in the new system. You're going to have a new ERP. You're going to have a new data system that looks at it. And I just look at it and think, why did we ask for 120 things for procurement when the reality is they don't need that? Or if they ask for X, we could all agree on so many, right? That we have a common ground and that we're not doing duplication of effort and then pulling different reports, which will create confusion for us to do that. So that's part of understanding. I think going back, and I just want to go back a little bit to the supplier too. Why is this important for them? They need to understand their organization they're working with. They need to understand from their perspective as the supplier, what data elements we have, what are we capturing, and the credibility of it. And then what is the provider able, so that we can meet together without friction. Believe it or not, I don't like friction, but if you create it, I'll participate.
You will. You said a key word there. You said credible. You said credible, which is really important, because I still are on calls today in which providers say, my data is not clean. We just can't get it clean enough to understand, is this really the price? Are we on contract, off contract, all those sorts of things. And so it's still very difficult for organizations to either scrub their own data, or for somebody, whether it's value analysis or supply chain, get enough attention internally at their organizations to say, this data needs to help be normalized and clean so we can be accurate and actionable. The other data piece that you talked about, Terri, was the quality data you did also, Jenell. And so what what suppliers have to realize is you come to us and we're not just looking at, oh, it's going to save us, $100,000. We need to look at, but what are the outcomes that may be affected by this? And whether they're quality or that patient is getting better sooner, length of stay, whatever it is, we have to gather all of that. And I love the silos. I'm now in Iowa on my husband's grandparents' farm looking at silos. But I think it's so important for them to understand, because they say, why does it take so long to make a decision? Why can't we get into talk to you further or whatever? Is it all of this has to go on? On the flip side, when we finally have made a decision, then we put in sort of this dateline of when are we going to look back on this decision? Some of them call it a retrospective. And then all of that data, that single source of truth for each one of those silos. It's not just one single source of truth. For each of those silos, what did we use then? So important how value analysis then documents all of this and how we go about all of this, and then bring them in, the suppliers, for QBRs, quarterly business reviews, any of those sorts of things. So any help on the front end, understanding what are your billing codes, what are your pieces of information.
I think that part too, I just wanted to add that it's not value analysis doing it all. I mean, we really try, I know the three of us have really tried to say, okay, it's about bed usage. I'll just take that. Well, that bed usage is monitored by a bed group, and they're the ones that should provide that report. If that's one of the measurements we're using for effectiveness, our role is to coordinate who's going to pull it and bring it in. It shouldn't be, we know enough to link up the people. We know enough, I'm talking about value analysis professionals, but as value analysis professionals, you can't take on the world. You've got to use your resources that you have, and that common ground, I think, is so important. And once you have that, and I know we've talked a little bit about that, is then the argument should cease. The product did not achieve the outcome. That's not what we want. None of us set up a product to fail, but it didn't, and here's why it didn't. And here's where we'll either work with you to resolve it or come up with something. And that, I know, sets up a future topic we're going to have as far as contracting strategies, because that's part of that risk share in my mind. Data will help to support those initiatives going forward as well.
I think as long as you have strong baseline data, it's very easy to go back and to measure multiple outcomes based on a singular set of data. But that singular set of data may come from different sources, as Barbara and Terri said, and need to be scrubbed and compiled and drilled down to a solid foundation. And that does take time, because, value analysis may not have the direct access to the report they need, but may need to talk to someone else who then assigns it to someone else, who then puts it in their queue, who then gets it back to them a week or 2 weeks later. And then it has to be scrubbed for the information I'm looking for. So it takes time, but I think once you have that foundation, it really helps move things along. And I'm going to back up just a split half a step. It also helps from a coding and billing perspective. So when you're starting to look at the outcomes and pulling particular cases, the data for particular cases that used a particular item or unification subset, then you can start to see the variation. And it really helps identify compliance within the organization, who's not using it as intended, or the creep factor. They said they would use it for a particular diagnosis, and now they're using it on everyone who comes through the door. Do we need to put guardrails on this, or is this really the better product, and how else are we going to measure that? So it's used, I think the UDIs are used on multiple levels for multiple decisions and data pulling, and it's not just a number that goes in and there it sits. They really are extremely useful.
Yeah, keeps your process objective. I always think it takes out the subjectivity.
Yeah.
I just don't like it. When you have an evaluation that come in, it's like, well, Mary, and isn't that on a floor, you'll have 28 Marys complete an evaluation form and they all didn't like it. Anyway, that's our eyes, right? I look at that going, Mary really doesn't like it. And she submitted all these forms. Right. That's the logic. We're using measurements like we've described is objective in its process. Right. We deal with patients and patients have variation. That's human nature. But the reality, if we can keep it as objective as possible, we're going to always get to the right decision. I really do feel we get to the right decision.
Yeah. Data drives decisions, always.
Yeah. It takes out the it takes out the emotional part. It should take out some of the emotional part of it,
Right.
I think one of the things that we want to convey today, sort of, I know we have a few minutes remaining, so in the sort of art of trying to get to the end and what are the key messages and things, I think on the supplier side is add new things to whatever your checklists are when you're going in to talk to somebody, and actually ask them, what is your process and how long might it take to gather the information that you might need internally? Because for some reason, we don't all have easy buttons. I really should buy one of those and have it here so I can press it on here. But there are no real easy buttons. Now, there's a lot of new job titles and new positions opening up, especially in supply chain, like transformation officers and a variety of people on how they get data and things. But put on your checklist, what is your process? And how long might it take then to maybe get all of this together, and when we should get back together again? So it's not just like they're going into a little black box. We've used that a couple times today, but so that they really understand. So on the supplier side, on the provider side, I always are a big proponent of value analysis and supply chain and all that means in supply chain, to really learn more about how can data be more readily available in their organizations. You can't just say, oh, okay, I'll wait 3 weeks for that piece of information, because I'd always do some sort of ethics things on some of these podcasts, but there's a patient on the other end of perhaps a real life-saving or life improvement product or service that we're going to need. And it's not just we're inundating you because we want new Band-Aids with, kids' comics on them. These are really life-saving things that are really important to our business. And I think making the case that value analysis is really looking at all of these parameters and keeping that patient in the focus will help their organizations move along. Terri?
Yeah, I think you did a really good job of identifying it's multiple locations, multiple data, multiple groups that have to be involved. But the widget there that keeps those groups going, in my mind, is value analysis when it comes to products, whether it's a product review for a new product or an existing product that we're going to have. And the other thing you mentioned is we don't do this for every single product category. A highly commoditized product category is not going to get the same effort. That doesn't mean we don't want a quality product. It's just that that's part, again, of value analysis to identify when we do this review, what are the critical parts that we need to include and what are things that we don't, that truly are just about pricing. I mean, that's reality. We want it to be price effective and have value for the patients as well. So I think that's an important thing. And the measurement is not about telling either party, you don't know what you're talking about, but it's coming to common ground on that.
Right. I don't think I could add anything different than what you two just said. I think I agree 100%. My only thing that I would perhaps add is that there is data growth over the last few years, and every year there seems to be more and more data that's available and different ways of looking at things. And my only hope is that data will be more readily available as time goes on and with this growth potential. And I think we're starting to see it. So, from a supplier perspective, just have a little patience, and that organization you're working with may not be there, but they'll get there. And it is a partnership, for improved outcomes and to keep the patient at the center of every decision that we have, every data-driven decision that we make. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for joining us. As always, I could sit and talk all day to these two lovely ladies. I learn something from them every day. Not only have I worked with them, they are my mentors. We learn together, we forge the forest together. So if you'd like to learn more, please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jenell.
Thanks.